and welcome to this very special episode of Frankly Speaking, where there is going to be talk about politics, but no hoo-ha, no finger pointing. This is going to be a conversation which analyzes politics over the decades, how it has moved from caste to class, and of course, personalities. And joining me tonight is none other than journalist, economic expert, former media advisor, and author, Dr. Sanjaya Baru, who's come out with his latest book, India's Power Elite, Class, Caste, and a Cultural Revolution. Welcome to Frankly Speaking, Dr. Sanjay Baru. And I want to ask you, how interesting has it been for you to move on from accidental prime minister, where you wrote about your colleague, your boss at that point in time, the media advisor to Dr. Manmohan Singh, as your role was, and you wrote about those years, to now analyzing a complete contrast, not just to the society, but also to politics and personalities in politics with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on whom, Dr. Baru, you've written this book.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Navika, for inviting me to be a guest in your very interesting weekend show. Let me show the cover of my new book. This is the cover of the book. It's called India's Power Elite. In fact, your question is very appropriate, because in some ways, this book is the product of the consequences of the other book which you mentioned. In fact, it was sitting in this very room that I spoke to your colleague at that time in April 2014, very much in April 2014, I think 11th April, talking about the accidental Prime Minister, and all hell broke loose as a consequence of that interview. The interesting thing about the reaction to that book was that across India, across the country, I met thousands and thousands of people, particularly young people, who said that the book had opened the door into the corridors of power in Delhi. People who said, we never understood how things happen in Delhi, and your book showed us how things happen in Delhi. But the reaction in Delhi itself, particularly Lutyens' Delhi, as all of us now refer to this part of Delhi, was the opposite. They said, my God, how could you have written a book having been a part of this darbar? How could you have actually come out and written about what is happening inside? They called it betrayal. And that set me thinking, this completely divergent opinion, that the opinion of the outsider welcoming an analysis of how power works, and the opinion of the insider protesting against any analysis of how power works. And I think this book in some ways tries to understand the nature of power, how it has evolved over the years in India, and the nature of the transition that has happened in these 6 years or so, with the end of what we call the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty and the rise of a completely new political leadership, not just the BJP leadership. You look at the non-BJP states also, the Congress, the old Congress, has been fighting new political formations, whether in Andhra or Telangana, or indeed Bengal or Tamil Nadu, or everywhere else in the country. So there is a political transition, a shift in power, and of course, naturally in India, caste and class play a very important role in these politics of our country. So I try to analyze how these play out in this transition.
So, Dr. Baru, I want to ask you, power elite, the term that you have used in the title of the book, power elite, is almost like what Lutyens' Delhi was in the Gandhi era, or Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh's 10 years of rule, and even before that. Are there any power elite, and if there are, who do you describe as the power elite of Delhi today? Because the old order has changed its yielding place to new.
Yes, you see, I mean, the change is at the level of the political leadership. But when we talk of the power elite, and the term power elite is used in literature, there's a lot of writing. In fact, my own book is inspired by a book written in the 1950s by an American sociologist, C. Wright Mills, that was titled The Power Elite, which looks at the US post-war American society and who controls the levers of power. So the controllers of the levers of power cut across many social groups. you have business leaders, you have landowners, you have the bureaucracy, which, for example, was not so important in the 50s in the US, but in India has always been an important element of the power system. You have intellectuals, public intellectuals, you have political leaders. So political leaders are only one element, though they sit at the top of the pyramid of power, they are only one element. The power elite have multiple dimensions. You have economic power, you have political power, you have cultural power, you have the power of the military, the power of the security forces. I analyze all these and how, over time, the power has shifted from one group to another, or within a group, what are the dynamics. For example, I say in the book, during Nehru's time, the communist parties used to call Nehru's government Tata Birla ki Sarkar. That used to be the slogan. Today, the same parties call Narendra Modi's government Ambani Adani ki Sarkar. So, the Tata and Birla have been replaced by Ambani and Adani. But the understanding that certain business groups dominate politics in the country is, of course, a universal view across most countries.
So, Dr. Baru, before we get into each of the questions I have on the book per se, I want to ask you, for somebody wanting to pick up this book, India's Power Elite, how would you classify the levers of power in the present day India, especially in Narendra Modi's India since 2014 up until now? We're in the 7th year.
Well, I think what we see as far as the current regime is concerned is a increasing centralization of power. And that contrasts with what we saw in the previous 2 decades, particularly from around 1989, when you had a coalition government of VP Singh and Chandrasekhar, and then you had a minority government of Narasimha Rao and another minority government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee and a third minority government of Manmohan Singh, all of them dependent on support from either allies or outside support. You had a long period from 1991 to 2014 of relatively weak central governments, because the power was divided among several elements in those coalition governments. Now, for the first time, like during Indira's few years, I mean, not Indira's early years, Indira Gandhi's early years, but from, say, 1971 till about 77, those 5-6 years, out of which 2-3 years were the emergency, you had a very powerful prime minister and a very powerful prime minister's office. That is what we see today. So, when you ask the question, what are the levers of power? Clearly, once again, the most important lever of power is political power, and that is not always the case. I mean, political power was important during early years of independence, but even Nehru had an extremely powerful cabinet, in the sense that he had members in his cabinet who demanded equal treatment. I mean, in the initial years, even Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a member of his cabinet. You had Morarji Desai, Jagjivan Ram, and later on Y.B. Chavan. So a lot of powerful provincial leaders or even national leaders were members of the Nehru cabinet. It was Indira Gandhi whose government was called, she is the only man in her cabinet, or something. People used to say that Indira Gandhi was the only man in her cabinet because of the nature of power she wielded. We are back to that situation.
Sexist like hell.
Well, that was what was said of her, if you remember. And we are back in that situation where you have an extremely powerful prime minister. So, in terms of the levers of power, certainly political power today dominates. You cannot, of course, avoid the fact that big business is another lever of power. And the relationship between business and politics, business and government changes. And I have a whole chapter that looks at that, because there are periods in which politicians are more powerful than businessmen. There are periods in which businessmen are more powerful than politicians. The balance of power between business and politics keeps changing in India. And today we are in a situation where I don't think any businessman can claim that he has any influence over the prime minister in the country. So, you have a political leader who's far more powerful than any business leader. There are other elements. I mean, there are feudal elements. There is the bureaucracy, the IAS.
But wasn't
Sure.
but wasn't that a corollary of the fact that after 3 decades we've had a majority government, and a majority government that has been led by a man like Narendra Modi, a personality, and the coming back of the personality cult, the fact that he on his own can command that kind of a sway over vast tracts of the Indian political space, and various cutting across states and vote banks and what have you. He has appealed to a whole lot of people, and if it was something that was seen as a fluke in 2014, then in 2019 he comes back bettering his past 2014 performance. So clearly, there hasn't been another leader who's won uh, after these coalition years, or decades rather, in the manner in which Modi has. So the fact is that you would expect him to be powerful.
No, no, no. But there's a difference between having a majority and being an unquestioned political leader and actually centralizing power. Because don't forget, we are a parliamentary system. The Prime Minister is technically, under the Constitution, primus inter pares, first among equals. The government is actually run by the Council of Ministers. There is a cabinet and there's a cabinet secretariat. So in theory, even if we have a political party that has absolute majority or two-thirds majority, the Prime Minister need not ride roughshod over the entire government. In practice, that is what happened during a certain phase of Indira Gandhi's tenure, not her entire term, but certainly between 71 and 76. And it happened in the initial months of Rajiv Gandhi's tenure, that when you are such absolute majority, you want to ride roughshod. And very whimsical kind of government was run by Rajiv Gandhi. If you remember the way he dismissed the Foreign Secretary AP Venkateshwaran in a press conference. So power goes to your head if you have absolute majority. But I think what we are now seeing is different. It's not about the individual, centralizing power. It is about the nature of the dispensation, if you like, the nature of the dispensation, where even from within the BJP, Narendra Modi has emerged as the unchallenged leader by eliminating all opposition. I mean, I have not discussed this in this book, but don't forget that he came up in 2014 challenging what in those days used to be called the Delhi clique. L.K. Advani, Sushma Swaraj, Arun Jaitley, Rajnath Singh, all these Delhi leaders, and then there was Nitin Gadkari. So he came and took over the party, and Amit Shah, his ally from Gujarat, becomes the president of the party. So you have a political transition even within the BJP, which contributes to a centralization of power. So much so that cabinet ministers today, whether it's the finance minister or the foreign minister, they are more like secretaries to government and not like Morarji Desai was the finance minister of India, or for that matter, Indira Gandhi was also the finance minister at that time during her own government. You had very powerful cabinet ministers. That is no longer the case.
I want to remind you that in the Nehru era that you're talking about, and he was called a great Democrat, he brought in the first amendment to the Indian Constitution that placed limits on free speech. He invoked Article 356 several times, and so did Indira Gandhi. So when you're talking about the concentration of power, it is very clear that Nehru, in his own way, had that centralization of power in himself. Indira Gandhi, in her own way, had that centralization of power. It even led to the breaking up of the Congress party at that point in time. On the other hand, look at the way the BJP has gone. People have accepted within the BJP that yes, Narendra Modi is more equal than them, simply because of the public support, charisma, call it what you will, that he enjoys, and therefore there is no challenge and no way that you will see pressure on the BJP system disintegrating. So I'm asking you, I want to ask you, because this is an issue that has come up several times, where people say that, oh, Narendra Modi is equal to centralization of power, lack of dissent, the fact that, this whole Lutyens Delhi or the Lutyens intellectuals, or call it the Khan Market gang, the Prime Minister's terminology for it. They have all problems with their liberal values. Uh, has that really been something that has never been challenged before by any political leader? What about Jayalalitha? What about the kind of cases? We've seen personality cults even before. Why does it become so pronounced when there is a conversation of Prime Minister Modi?
No, in fact, I completely agree with you. We've had lots of provincial leaders who have also centralized power. My argument is not that Mr. Modi is the first person. In fact, if anything, it was Indira Gandhi who was the first person. It was Indira Gandhi who began dynastic politics in India, and I've said that in my book. When she decided to make Sanjay Gandhi a virtual successor and then became Rajiv Gandhi. That's not the argument. The argument is that first of all, I think we can debate on how liberal or how centralized was the government of Jawaharlal Nehru. You know, but that's a debate one doesn't have to get into now because my book is not about that. My book is essentially about the relative relationship between political power, the power of business, the power of landed interests, the power of the bureaucracy. I have a whole chapter on the bureaucracy, which in India is an extremely important institution of power. Then there is the media, and I have a whole chapter on the media and the power of the media. So I am looking at the relative balance, and in this relative balance, it keeps changing. And you are right to say that we have had situations where political leaders, other than Mr. Modi, have been equally powerful in dealing with this. Jayalalitha is a good example. I mean, one can think of many other chief ministers who ride roughshod over various institutions in their state. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that what is now happening in India is part of a much larger change. And centralization of power in one leader is only one aspect. That's not my book is not only about that. It's one aspect of a shift in the basis of those whom we regard as the country's power elite. I mean, you mentioned Lutyens Delhi and Khan Market gang. Well, Lutyens Delhi was very much the darbar in which the power elite of this country operated. And Prime Minister Modi has directly attacked that Lutyens Delhi. And I have a lovely quote in my book where he says, "Ke Lutyens ki dunya mujhe apnaya nahi," that they have not accepted me and therefore I now reject them. But that is the equation that I am looking at in this book. What has happened to Lutyens Delhi? What has happened to this power elite? And as I said at the very beginning of your interview, that Lutyens Delhi was not happy when I wrote The Accidental Prime Minister. But that Lutyens Delhi is no longer relevant today because you have a new elite and a new set of people who are equally powerful, not any less powerful, if probably even more powerful in the positions of power. And that's the transition which I try to capture in this book.
So, Dr. Baru, I want to ask you, and I've worked with you as a colleague. You were my senior. So pardon the chances I'm going to take in this interview, but I want to needle you a bit. You
Sure.
were very much part of the same Lutyens Delhi, the Darbar Delhi, because you were accepted by Dr. Manmohan Singh. You went in there. You were part of that. Even in 1991, you've written earlier in your books of how you carried messages from Narasimha Rao to Dr. Manmohan Singh, and subsequently you were in South Block as the media advisor, and you saw power from the inside, how it really functioned. How did it feel when the same Lutyens circuit, actually rejected and pointed fingers at you when you wrote this book called The Accidental Prime Minister? And how do you look at it now from the outside? Because there is a new power elite, as you say. Who is this new power elite?
Well, first of all, Navika, this is a question I've been repeatedly asked in these last 7 years. And my simple answer to the question has been that this is only in India that the question gets asked. You look at the experience of most democracies, particularly Western democracies, it is common practice for former members of the of government to retire or come out of government and write from prime ministers down. People have written books. Certainly all media advisors to the British Prime Minister have written books. All press secretaries to the US President over the last 50 years have written books. So, it's a common practice in all democracies. And I think, as I said at the very beginning, what struck me about public reaction to that book was the fact that they said, look, you are the first guy who's telling us how things work. You went in, you saw, you came out, and you wrote about it. And that was part of the reason for a widespread favorable reaction to that book. But as I myself have written in this book, the Delhi Darbar, as I call it, Latyan's Delhi as you call it, said, my God, once you are inside, you're supposed to not write about this. This is a betrayal. And that idea of betrayal is very much there in most organizations, not just in Latyan's Delhi, in any company, in any closed circuit, in any club. I mean, today, for example, there's a crisis in Gymkhana Club going on about the management of the Gymkhana Club, and many members have said, this should not come out into the open. Why does it come out into the open? It's a private club. How does it make a difference to the rest of the world? What is happening inside a private club? It's a very common reaction for those who are inside, that once you are inside, you don't want the outside to know what's happening inside. It's true in our families. When there are differences within a family, you don't want the neighbors to know that within the family you are having arguments, father, son having arguments, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law having arguments. So nobody wants the outside to know what is happening inside. But I think government is a public institution. Political parties are public institutions. And in a democracy, people have the right to know what is happening inside government. That is why the Right to Information Act was introduced by the UPA. What is the right to information? You have the right as a citizen to find out what is happening inside government. So when someone writes a book about what's happening inside government, he is actually empowering the citizen by using that right to information, right? So I hope that today, whoever is in the system today will come out at some point and write a book. I hope we have that amount of democracy and freedom still, that people don't feel scared of coming out and writing.
Let me challenge you now, Dr. Baru, and just put a hand on your heart and tell me that you lasted as the media advisor to Dr. Manmohan Singh for the first term, in fact, a little less than the first term. And after that, there were differences that sprang up because of the big house, the 10 Janpat not quite liking your presence there, and there were problems and you had to walk out. And because you walked out, obviously it's human to feel a sense of, anger, a sense of being humiliated, which is why you probably wrote that book. I want to ask you today what Narendra Modi has done, and I want you to dwell on this. The reason that he's changed the paradigm of what was described as Latyan's Delhi is because in the old Latyan's Delhi, you're right. It was a closed group. It was almost as if it was from the imperial era where dogs and Indians were not allowed into a certain restaurant or an eating place. And that's the way this Latyan's crowd actually treated people from the outside. And who were these people from the outside? People who did not have pedigree. Their parents were not, ICS or IAS or IFS. Or people who were not children of affluent families, possibly royalty or industrialists or something, had somehow made their way by the dint of their hard work and very ordinary backgrounds to achieve something. Those people had no entry up until 2014 on the high table. And Narendra Modi changing that. You talk about Delhi Gymkhana, that's exactly the case in point. It is the hangover of the imperial regime that stayed on for over 65 years after independence. So I want to ask you, if this has changed, is it for the better? Do you call this a societal shift? Do you call this a cultural shift? This is also by some people, and the Prime Minister himself is called the rise of the aspirational India. How do you see these changes that have happened?
Well, first of all, Navika, you are a journalist, I've been a journalist. And it is our dharma as journalists to write about what we see or to talk about what we see. You are in television, you don't write. I was in print, I used to write, right? So writing about the reality around us is our dharma. You don't ask a painter, why have you painted this painting? You don't ask a sculptor, why have you sculpted? You only look at the painting and say whether you like it or not. You look at sculpture and say whether you like it or not. You look at a painting and ask the painter to explain what the painting says, but you never ask him, why did you paint it? So one never asks a writer, why did you write? The motivations for writing can be any number, but at the end of the day, the product has to be judged by its content. That's my first answer to your question. My second answer to your question is that in fact my book does precisely what you want to be done, which is to understand the nature of this change. There is change. There is a change happening in India. There is, absolutely right, a new India. I talk about the new India. I talk about the aspirational Indian. And I have some interesting ways of portraying this. I say that in the past you had many Indians who went to a restaurant and saw a fork and a spoon and did not know what the difference. What do you do with a fork? What do you do with a spoon? Often you use the spoon like a fork and the fork like a spoon. And many of them felt a bit uncomfortable. That was the old India. In the new India, you don't care. You put both aside and eat with your hand, even in a 5-star hotel, right? That's the new India. That is far more self-confident. That is not at all westernized. And that's the change that is happening. And I think that is what Prime Minister Modi has understood and recognized and is appealing to that class. But it's the same new India. Because of it is aspirational, it wants opportunity. So at the end of the day, whether Narendra Modi and the BJP have succeeded or not will depend on how much of that aspiration they are able to fulfill. It's not identity of the Indian is one, aspiration is another. And as long as we remain focused on identity and ignore aspirations, we are going to have lots of votes coming in based on identity, but not enough support in the future if the aspirations are not addressed. And all the relics of the past, Delhi Gymkhana Club, whatever, all these are clubs. And in every club, media is a club. In every club, those who are inside want to keep those who are out. And those who are inside do not like those who are inside to go out and say things about those who are inside. This is a very important, social phenomenon. And I think what we are now seeing in government is a completely new set of people, a new class of people. In fact, often even new castes coming in, a transition. I analyze the composition, the caste composition of the IAS, for example, or the class composition of members of parliament. I try to do that with whatever data is available. And you can see change happening. And therefore, as a writer, I am saying, what is the nature of change? I'm only analyzing. I'm not saying, is it good or bad? You ask the question, is what is happening good or bad? That's a moral question. I'm not interested in whether what is happening is good or bad. I'm simply interested in understanding what is happening. And I said that with my hand on my heart. You wanted me to cross my heart.
You talked about the media. Well, it's a very convent educated,
I know.
From a small town when you have these convent
schools
which teach you how to, I'm not a big town public school educated person. I don't have an Oxbridge, degree.
Neither do I.
My parents thought at that time, possibly settling down before my dad's retirement was more important than going for an Oxford degree. That's how this other class, which is not part of Lutyens Delhi, used to think at one point of time, possibly still do. But you talk about the media, and I want to ask you this, because many times people just skirt around this issue. The issue of the media is important. So far, the media has been, as you said, a part of a club. That club has been destroyed. There are new people coming in. But what really strikes me as odd is that somebody who's changed definition, somebody like yourself, you've sort of written on many things. You're intellectually so broad-minded. You look at Times Now as the channel which is a pro-BJP channel, you say. And you say from TV anchors who are openly partisan in support of the Prime Minister to celebrities who endorse every one of his slogans, the worlds of entertainment politics have been brought more closer than ever before. And in the league of Hema Malini, Smriti Irani, Anupam Kher, Akshay Kumar, Kangana Ranaut, you even mention Myself, Navika Kumar. Okay. Celebrity? I mean, from being a nobody to now being a celebrity and then in this league. Uh, are you getting carried away, Dr. Baru? And what is pro Modi? Isn't all of India pro Modi? Because in the first past the post system, uh, Modi Modi is the most popular leader. Can you really take away from that? Can you take away from the fact that audience, viewers, etc., watch or like what they say? I mean, see social media around you, see people's expressions around you, and you will know. So why is it so important? In the good old days, when we wrote stories, and when I was in print, only classify me as a television celebrity now, but I've spent 15 years in print as well. And I want to ask you, in those days, we did stories without being labeled. Why is this a new fad to label people pro Modi or anti Modi? As you said, every journalist writes what they see, and in television, speak what they see. Then why is it different this time around?
Well, first of all, it's not different this time around. Let me make 2 points in response to your long question. First of all, the social class of celebrities is an important social category. As I mentioned at the very beginning of my book is inspired by a very classic study of American society called The Power Elite by Wright Mills, in which is a whole chapter on Hollywood and the media in the United States and how celebrities are manufactured. And then celebrities become empowered because they then influence ordinary people. I mean, when, for example, Amitabh Bachchan says that, wear this particular shirt or use this particular toothpaste or go to this particular state for a holiday, people take it seriously. And that is celebrity power. And there is something called celebrity power across all societies. So therefore, it's not exceptional to India that there are celebrities. Celebrities have power. They are part of the power elite. You, Navika, and were an Indian Express reporter when you are not a celebrity. Today you're a celebrity. I mean, I feel honored to be on your show on a Sunday night because this is, basking in the glory of your celebrity status. Now, the fact is you're a celebrity today, right? And you have others who are in the media who are celebrities because media gives you that access. Television media particularly gives you that access. You are now entering the living rooms and the bedrooms of millions of people, and you are important. What you say influences people. It's not the same thing as an ordinary reporter of a newspaper doing a story bylined or non-bylined. Mass media around the world, mass media is an important instrument of propagation of ideas, of habits, of cultures, etc. And in India today, Bollywood is coming into television partly because people have stopped going to theaters for a variety of reasons, and certainly with OTT and with COVID and all this quarantine business, everybody is now on television or on your laptop rather than in cinema theaters. So this celebrity power of the cinema versus television and media is getting narrower and narrower. So I put you all in one category. Now, as for the second part of your question, why is it you say pro Modi or anti Modi? I make a general point, and incidentally, I refer there to how I looked at media when I was in media and when I was in the Prime Minister's office. I think broadly you would agree with me, there are 4 categories in the media. There are the professionals, and certainly I would put you in the category of professionals, even if your perception that your channel is pro-government. It is a perception. It may not be a fair perception from your point of view, but that's a perception, right? There's a perception that NDTV is anti-government. Now again, people may say that's not fair. There may be people in the NDTV who say, no, we are very professional. But that's a perception. So there are pure professionals, and a lot of them in the media. In fact, a majority, I would say, are professionals. Then there are those who are pro, whoever is in government at a point in time. So in the past, they were pro-Congress, and they are anti-Congress. Today they would be pro-BJP and anti-BJP. That's the truth. We know who they are from what they write, from what they say. That is how journalists are, and not just in India, across the world. I mean, in Britain, you would say the Guardian is a pro-Labour Party newspaper, is an anti-conservative newspaper. The Financial Times tends to be always pro-conservative. right? In the US, Donald Trump said CNN is anti-Republican, anti-Trump. New York Times is anti-Trump, right? So this classification of political biases is common across all democracies. And finally, of course, I have a category called the corrupt, and I know, there are some colleagues, what I call black sheep in our families, and we know who they are. And certainly those in government who they are. I mean, since I've been in government, I can tell you that those who are today in government know who are the professional journalists, who are partisan either this way or that way, and who are purely corrupt. These are not secrets, and I've just written about it, but they are not secrets.
I want to ask you, from your experience with Dr. Manmohan Singh and seeing the Congress party from close quarters, this whole shift in class, caste, and culture that you're seeing, is this also because up until Rajiv Gandhi, the dynasty was fairly well accepted? Actually, the challenge came in when Sonia Gandhi did not become the prime minister. Dr. Manmohan Singh was appointed the prime minister. She was the separate power center. And when you were media advisor, we've had several quarrels over stories on the National Advisory Council and that special class of appointments and Padma Shris that came from there. And Rahul Gandhi, has carried it forward. The fact is that, to give it to them, do you think this palace culture no longer works in India? The Gandhi family palace culture, whether you look at Rahul Gandhi or Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, that is just not clicking with the people of India. And what are the reasons that you think this has happened?
Well, I entirely agree with that proposition, Navika. In fact, I have had this view for a long time. It's not a new view. The decline of the Congress actually begins in the late 80s. In 1991, I wrote a book called 1991 on how Narasimha Rao made history, and in that book I have a whole chapter that analyzes the data of the 1991 election and makes the point that if Rajiv Gandhi had not been assassinated in May 1991, it is entirely possible that the Congress may not have had the numbers to lead a government. If you look at the voting pattern before his assassination and after his assassination, you can see the surge in favor of the Congress and a decline in the BJP vote in that election. And so the decline of the Congress begins then. It's not new. For a variety of reasons, in 2004, you suddenly had a situation where the Congress had the single largest numbers, and the communist parties agreed to support a Congress-led government, and that is how the UPA was formed. But the fact is that the Congress lost its dominant status long back. And what the 21st century has established, and that is incidentally how I conclude even the book Accidental Prime Minister. If you read the last chapter, the point I make in that last chapter is that the country has rejected the leadership of Rahul Gandhi. That was my reading of the 2014 verdict. Because after all, in 2009, Manmohan Singh went to the people of India saying, I've given you 5 years from 2004 to 2009. Give me another 5 years. And the people of India gave him another 5 years. In fact, he got more seats in 2009 than he got in 2004. So 2009 was a victory for Dr. Manmohan Singh because he delivered more seats to his party 5 years after being PM than he was the case in 2004. What happened in 2014? A catastrophic collapse in the support of the Congress party. Now, in any other democracy, in any other political party,
it started earlier, because despite a victory, Dr. Manmohan Singh forgot how to assert himself.
No, that's a different story, Navika. Let's not get into
was more assertive. Wasn't that true then?
That's a different story. Let's not get into those details. I'm talking of the decline of the Congress as a party. What happened in UPA2 is a different story. But the point I'm making is that the collapse of the Congress in 2014 was the first sign that this leadership that was then there, under Rahul Gandhi, was not going to work. And By 2019, the Congress should have come up with something new. That is what happens in any political party. When one leader doesn't offer victory, the party goes for a new leader all over the world. It should have happened, for example, in the BJP in 2009, because in 2004 when they lost, in 2014, and that is how Prime Minister Modi came, because what was Prime Minister Modi's message to his own party in 2013? He said, you went into elections in 2009 under the leadership of Lal Krishna Advani and you lost. If you want to go back to the people of India again under the leadership of LK Advani, you will lose again. Change the leader. I am offering myself. That is how he took over the BJP. The leadership transition in the BJP happened in 2013 because the party understood.
But do you think the Congress can run without a Gandhi? Or will the Gandhis ever allow anybody to become? Which of the two is true?
Well, I certainly think the Congress can run without the Gandhis. It's running in different parts of India. After all, what is the party that Sharad Pawar leads, Jagan Reddy leads, even Chandrasekhar Rao leads, Mamata Banerjee leads? These are all ex-Congress people. They are all leading different, breakaway groups of the Congress. So the Congress is actually in power in several states, but in different avatars. It's only in Delhi that the original avatar is no longer in a position to deliver victory.
When the Vista change is spoken about, the intellectual class, the Delhi Darbar class comes out and says that, oh, this is megalomania.
We have all over the country lots of examples of megalomania. When you come to power, there's a certain, arrogance of power. Arrogance of power is across political parties. I know a lot of people who are today in government. I knew them when they were not in government, when they were not ministers. They were different people. Once you got power, you become arrogant. That's the nature of power, I can tell you. It cuts across political parties.
So do you think, Dr. Baru, many people talk about the fact, and this is the cultural change that I want to ask you about, when the Vista change is spoken about, the intellectual class, the Delhi Darbar class comes out and says that, oh, this is megalomania. This is somebody definitely trying to carry forward a personality cult. However, there is another part of India which thinks that, yes, the imperial look of the past needs to go and we need to be an Atmanirbhar India. Where do you stand on this debate?
Well, megalomania is not unique to any one political party in this country. We have all over the country lots of examples of megalomania. When you come to power, there's a certain, arrogance of power. Arrogance of power is across political parties. I have seen it over the years. Therefore, I wouldn't say only one political party or one political leader is affected by the arrogance of power. Everybody is. In fact, if you live in Delhi long enough and you know people who are once in government, out of government, back in government, you can see from their behavior. I know a lot of people who are today in government. I knew them when they were not in government, when they were not ministers. They were different people. Once you got power, you become arrogant. That's the nature of power, I can tell you. It cuts across political parties and it across the country, right? So there's nothing unique about the megalomania or whatever arrogance of power of those who are presently in power.
And on the Central Vista?
On the Central Vista. Well, look, I have referred to the Central Vista project as a metaphor, as a metaphor of change, right? So here is a city that the BJP inherited from the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, and it wants to leave its own imprint. Well, I'm not an architect. Many people have commented both favorably and negatively about the aesthetics of it. I'm not an aesthetician. I'm a social analyst. As a social analyst, I can tell you that this is very powerful political symbolism, right? That you want to leave behind. In fact, many, many years ago, I wrote a column in the Times of India called Democratic Taj Mahal. The purpose of that column was to say that every leader wants something left behind to be remembered by, like Shah Jahan left Taj Mahal as a symbol of his love for his beloved. Every politician wants a foundation stone somewhere or the other. This is a universal, affliction of all politicians, of all those who are power. They want to see how many foundation stones you are remembered by and how many buildings are you remembered by. So as a social analyst, I would say that this is certainly Mr. Modi's attempt to leave behind in Delhi permanent structures that the future will remember by. Whether it's aesthetically appealing, whether not aesthetically appealing, whether it will be as pretty as some of the existing buildings or not,
Yeah,
that is for
that's
architects.
another debate.
Yeah, that's another debate.
Well, Dr. Baru, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. This is a book that you wrote during the lockdown. We're now in this country going through a second wave, possibly more time to be spent indoors, masked up, isolated. Another book up your sleeve?
Yep, yep. I hope all of us come out of it healthy and safe. But I'm delighted that you found time, Navika. Thank you very much for having me on your show and allowing me to talk about my book. And I hope your viewers will all buy a copy and read it.
Well, thank you very much for joining me on Frankly Speaking, and I wish you all the very best with this latest contribution as an author by Dr. Sanjay Baru. Thank you.
Thank you.